Well, thanks for coming. Today we're going to talk about the 17th Avenue Corridor Study once again. Believe it or not, this came in front of you guys 9 months ago to the day. Basically, we gave you a quick synopsis of the study, and we probably asked too much of you at that point, so we gathered some more public information. We had a public meeting in March, got some more important feedback, and now we just want to have a pretty low-key, casual discussion about the corridor, where we are to date, and where we're headed. So really the reason why we studied this through MetroCog was 4 reasons. One is the congestion at 45th Street at times, and then at the 4-way stops in the Prairiewood area. And the second one was, this is basically the dead center of town right now, going east and west, and there's no bike facility for half of it, so it's a bike gap study from the interstate going to the river. The third was safety. There's a lot of crashes that occur in that area west of I-29 to 45th Street. It's a 4-lane undivided road with no center left turn lane. A lot of rear end crashes there. And then lastly, the pavement condition. It's for the most part, it's old concrete that's been there for a long time, and it's just starting to ride pretty rough and start to fall apart. So there's 4 reasons why we're here, and we hired KLJ 2.5 years ago to look at this, and they are ready to wrap this study up. So with that, I'll introduce Mike Bittner, the project manager. He knows all about this corridor inside and out, and I'll have a seat, and then we'll just have a good discussion on this.
So our study area on 17th incorporates all of 17th throughout the city of Fargo. So from 5th all the way west, kind of the Home Depot, it's really 51st Street. And so depending on where you typically travel on 17th, your definition of what 17th looks and feels like could be very, very different. On the west end, it's got a very commercial feel with a lot of traffic. As you transition east, you start to see some challenges between traffic moving and the land uses in the neighborhoods. And then on the far east side, it's a quiet local street. And so you can really see the challenge as you start to plan for a roadway like this. Is it's what we've said time and again throughout this process is this corridor is really going through an identity crisis. What is it trying to be when it grows up? Because as you look at it from kind of a macro scale, it's a pretty clear bike gap on a nice quiet corridor, identified on several studies as a good opportunity to improve that mode of travel. But also when you look at the traffic volumes and the congestion through the area, you can also see it really serves a functionality of really supporting the roadways adjacent to it. And so how do we go through the process of figuring out what does it want to be when it grows up? So a 3-step approach: opportunity, solution, implementation. As Jeremy mentioned, we had most of the technical analysis completed around June of 2018, but really the approval process and working with all the necessary stakeholders was really an important piece that we added a little bit at the end for an additional public input meeting. And so throughout the presentation, I'll sprinkle in the data we received from that last input. So starting with our original public input process, this was there are a lot of people interested in this project, and we worked really hard to make sure everybody could hear about it. And so we did a lot of social media blasts, targeted geographical social media blasts, newspapers. We did a postcard to everyone along the corridor, flyers at businesses, you name it. We even had a variable message sign along the corridor to try to get those drivers and people that are commuting that aren't just living along the corridor. So we had a lot of great feedback and involvement throughout the process. We did a lot of fun activities. We had an open bike audit. We had a lot of people, a lot of different workshop activities throughout the first couple phases of the meeting. But we still had about a 20 to 25 to 1 online versus in-person engagement. So we're having 100 people in person, but we're still getting a lot more activity online. And so you can just really see the level of interest, which is really high from a transportation study standpoint on just one corridor throughout the city. So our additional public involvement meeting, we had 75 people attend the meeting. I think it was certainly contentious, was maybe a nice way to put it. There was some people that were concerned about some of the early concepts that were brought forward. So we gave them a lot of different options to provide feedback at the meeting and online. And so again, I'll sprinkle that throughout the presentation. So we had a lot of great feedback at the meeting, but we had even more, again, online. We really had our ballot box stuffed online. We had 590 survey responses. So with the 75 people, a lot of people at the public input meeting, we provided the option online, so I think some took that. You probably, maybe some did both, but that's perfectly fine. So a lot of good comments, a lot of different ways. And then also, as I show you the feedback that we received, we also did ask, particularly for those online surveys, what is your relation to 17th Avenue? Because that's really important. If someone's coming from far away or they're living along the corridor, that's a big difference. And so you can check as many of these boxes as you wanted, whether you live along the corridor, you drive, you bike, you walk. What we found is about 50% of the people that filled out the online survey lived along the corridor, and about 60% drove. So I mean, if you live and you drive, that makes sense. You kind of do some together. About just shy of 20% biked, and about 15% walked along the corridor. So starting from, we broke this up by very different segments of the 17th Avenue. So starting on the west end, so 38th Street to 51st Street, kind of our more commercialized area, we have a lot of crashes and a lot of congestion at 45th Street. And you've probably, many of you have been stuck in that long queue, that left turn, westbound left turn. And so that actually has been recently improved based on the results, the early results of this study. This was reconfigured to add a second left turn lane. So through the process, we were able to identify some low-hanging, low-cost, high-reward improvements, such as this intersection, to really improve traffic flow at this location. Transitioning east from here, 42nd Street to 45th Street, we found that 50% of all the crashes on the corridor, so our 4-mile corridor, occurred in this section. And a lot had to do with rear ends. And that's because with the 4-lane section where you don't have that center left turn lane, we see a lot of vehicles taking a left. You don't expect it. You see some queues. It's a good example on the screen here of just a lot of rear end style crashes. So the concept generated in the short term along this segment was reconfiguring that second westbound through lane into a 2-way left turn lane. And so studies have shown that by adding that opportunity for people to make lefts, you can reduce crashes by about 50%. And it's pretty unique on this segment of the corridor. Throughout the entirety of the day, other than 1 hour, there's more traffic heading eastbound than westbound. And so that usually you kind of see directionality in the morning and the afternoon. But this actually works pretty well based on the traffic patterns. And so this was reconfigured this summer. So just that 42nd to 45th was reconfigured based on the preliminary findings and feedback we received along this concept as a way to improve safety. As we looked at long-term needs, there were a lot of things we couldn't accomplish with these shorter-term improvements where we really focused on safety. Access management was a big challenge for this commercial area. You can see all the different dots on the bottom of the screen. Studies have found that for every unsignalized driveway you have along a corridor, you increase crash potential by 2%. So a lot of different 2% dots on that screen. We really see heavy crashes, particularly just west of 45th Street. If you ever tried to make turning movements around there, there's just a lot of driveways and access points. And so long term, we knew that we wanted some sort of solution that would incorporate access management. We also want to look at the potential for the corridor to support some additional growth. A great example is the northwest quadrant of 38th Street and 17th. Will that be something different in the future? We tried to look into our crystal ball and forecast traffic to figure out what those changes could feel like. And so as we start to look at some of those, we do see that kind of that new configuration between 42nd and 45th, if we do add a lot more traffic, that may become a problem. So we looked at a longer term improvement, and this is really based on need, not based on, we're going to do this in 5 or 10 or 15 years, but really, if we start to see changes in traffic patterns and increases in traffic, what do we want this corridor to look like? And so this is a concept with the raised median. You can see the slider bar going back and forth. This was available online, where we can fit this pretty easily throughout the majority of the corridor, add the capacity, while also with that raised median, adding that raised median to improve safety. And so you can kind of see how we're looking longer term as the need starts to arise. So here's our first slide of this is our third public input meeting. And at this third public input meeting, so our first meeting was what were the issues? Tell us what your problems are, and then we'll try to solve them. The second one was here's 10 concepts, which ones do you like? And so based on that, we got these alternatives that we show you here. The last meeting, we made it simple. Yes, no, maybe. Do you like the concept that's presented in front of you? So try to get as much simple feedback as we can. So what we found at this third meeting is that the short term was supported at about 70%. There's only about 10% of the population that said, no, I just don't like that alternative outright. And this 21%, these maybes are really interesting, and I'll explain a little bit deeper on each one of these, because the reason why people said maybe was often, I like the idea, but, and then they provide some feedback. So this 21%, a lot of them, and what we heard through a lot of all these alternatives was, I like this, but what's the cost to me? I like this, but I'm worried about, the access management strategy. And so these maybes are an interesting population that I think that as you start to move forward, you can see some of those challenges towards implementation, that if you wanted to remedy some of those, you could maybe turn some of those maybes into yeses, or maybe not, maybe into nos if we're able to answer the questions better. Long term, a little bit less support. I think you kind of see it split evenly between the no and the maybe. A lot of this was, I don't know when we're going to need this or if we need this, so I'm not going to fully support it at this point. So transitioning to 25th Street to 38th Street, this was the primary, the public point of contention that came out, or was typically from this area. And there was, I had a lot of people come up to me and lament the fact of just the underpass, 20, 30 years ago. And so I think there was a little bit of distrust through the process of any alternatives, really considering the factors of the people living in that area. And so there were many people that weren't supportive of any concepts and that were vocal throughout the entire process. But we did want to start, excuse me, by just, okay, what are the problems here, and are there ways that we can solve them? And so our first key issue was traffic operations. We have 3 all-way stop control. Sorry. 3 all-way stop control at 38th, 34th, and 32nd. And we have about 10 to 1, sometimes 20 to 1 main line, so 17th Avenue traffic versus side street. So you can see the graphic here. This is kind of a bird's eye of looking at 38th and 17th. And so you can see there's 15 cars waiting for 3 cars on the side street. And so it creates a lot of delay. It takes several minutes to get from one side of the corridor to the other. And if you're on the side street, you can pull up and just turn right on. There's no challenges there. And so this starts to create some safety problems. We have really long queues. We have a lot of stop and go traffic. But what happens is if you're going to wait 10, 15 turns to get through the all-way stop control and there's no one on the side street, oftentimes we start to see people just roll through the stop sign, and they're frustrated. They feel like they stopped unnecessarily. And so this is a challenge not only for vehicles, but also for pedestrians or anyone walking through the area. We also see that, and studies support this, that if you feel like you stopped unnecessarily, oftentimes you'll pick up your speed to make up for lost time. So these always stop controls are, there's some people in the neighborhood that really like it because they feel like it's safer for pedestrians and it controls traffic speeds, but it is creating challenges on both of those fronts. We also see, challenges for bicyclists. If this is a bicycle corridor in the future, we have a lot of frustrated drivers, particularly in the future conditions that this is me biking with the helmet camera that, you almost get pushed off the side of the road a few times because people waited a long time and they don't feel like they want to necessarily wait any longer. So here's a video of the concept that was based off of the feedback that we received from that second round of public input. So what you're going to see here, this is from our second round of public input, and then I'll supplement that with the feedback we received at the end from that third public input meeting. So this was the same video we showed at that third public input meeting. And so this kind of directs where we're headed. So we have a 2-way separated bike facility. We have some pedestrian crossing improvements at West Gateway Circle. And then we have roundabouts at the 3 all-way stop control locations. So specifically starting with the 2-way bike facility, which we'll transition here in a second. These types of bike facilities, there's a lot of ways to separate them and give them kind of both directions of travel. These 2-way protected facilities have been found to reduce bike crash rates by 30 to 40%. And really attract ridership versus even just a typical bike lane. They show about 40 to 160% of people pull it from those different sources, even with just a regular bike lane. So it creates, the challenge. I think a lot of people struggle with that bike lane is, why is it so much better than the off-street? Well, you're in this line of sight, but also you're out of the driveways on the side street. We also wanted to make sure we had pedestrian improvements along this segment of the corridor. So at West Gateway Circle, we have some connections north and south to different parks and neighborhoods. So we felt like this was a good location to provide a better pedestrian crossing. Now, as you're watching the video, on the top of the screen, that is actually us modeling. This is 2040 traffic with the always stop control, and on the bottom, that's with this new traffic control, the roundabouts. And so you can see this is the same amount of cars. It looks vastly different. You can't get traffic through on the top. But the roundabouts do really improve traffic flow. So it's an 84% reduction in delays, while also having a 75% reduction in injury and fatal crashes, just because you eliminate that angled crash. But one of the big benefits and one of the concerns of the neighborhoods was, we don't want to make it so efficient that people are drawn here and they move very quickly. So that's one nice benefit of roundabouts. We also presented some signals. The roundabouts will also naturally calm traffic by forcing people to go to 10 to 15 miles per hour through the area. So it's a little bit of having your cake and eating it too, in terms of efficiency, but controlled efficiency. So what's unique about a mini roundabout is that its center island is fully traversable by trucks or buses. And the reason why we do that is it allows us to really shrink the size of the roundabout. And so in doing so, we didn't have to impact any of the properties. So roundabouts have been looked at several of these locations, but they all resulted in some impacts. And so this concept was allowing us to really shrink that cross section. We'd also look at some access control, particularly at 35th. We found a lot of crashes, angled crashes, that we thought we could resolve them with the roundabouts. It would allow us to, if you were coming here, you could actually take a right and make a U-turn at the roundabout. So it does facilitate some of that access management as kind of a secondary benefit. We'd also have some transit improvements along this segment of the corridor. So as we transition under the bridge, you'll see our first full, so you can kind of see the difference in context. This is a full roundabout. It's quite a bit bigger. You can add probably some nicer aesthetics than a couple bushes and some dirt, but just kind of to show the difference in size. And I'll talk about timing. Jeremy kind of alluded to some of the timing of the pavement needs, but I'll touch on that a little bit later. So in terms of additional feedback, we had combining the feedback we received at the public input meeting with our survey. We had about 58% said yes, about 23% said no, and about 20% said maybe. And so as we looked at what that maybe bucket was, a lot of them had to do with the technical data looks great, I'm interested, but I've never seen some of these in play, so I want to get more confidence before I give you a full endorsement. A lot of the maybes were also, I like the roundabouts because traffic flow is slow, but I don't like the bike facilities. Or I like the bike facilities, but I don't think we need the roundabouts. So one or the other. And then again, a big proponent of all the maybes and all the different categories was cost. I like the concept, but who's paying for it? How much is coming out of my pocket? And that was not a question we could fully answer at the time of this study, not knowing the direction we'd had. So you can kind of see that it is a pretty big bucket of maybes like we've been seeing. So, but that 22.8% of no's many of those were pretty staunch no's. Those were, under no circumstances are any of these concepts. And so we heard that loud and clear at our meetings. So our last segment is from 5th Street to 25th Street. It's just a little quicker. Now we've established a east-west bike facility throughout all of 17th, with the exception of this segment. And so what concept do we want to promote here? Well, off-road, we're going to start to blaze through a lot of really nice trees, put people in a lot of driveways. And so we looked at continuing that two-way bike facility with the protection. So kind of 25th to University, there's about 2 to 3 times more traffic than east of University. So having some sort of moderate protection, and then to the east, I think you could probably accomplish that with just pavement. We also wanted to make sure that our pedestrian crossings at key locations were properly are designed. So Essentia has always been one that's risen to the top of needs. So we looked at a raised pedestrian crossing to force people to slow down, kind of converting that to an overhead beacon. At South, we looked at either a beacon or in-roadway signs to help crossing between kind of the park and the parking lot to the north. On this segment from University to 25th, we had almost 71% yes, 10% no, 18.5% maybe. Again, that maybe bucket was, I like it, but I wish you would have added left turn lanes. You know, that would have really helped in and out of South or into these neighborhoods. Or I like it, but I don't know if we need the bike facilities because I'm not sure how many people will use it. And I like it, but the cost I'm concerned about. From 5th to University, pretty similar result, a little bit less, a couple percentage points less support. Again, the comment of unfamiliarity with the facility, and then again, just the potential use. You know, we're going to give this much space, how many bikes are actually going to be on there? And then again, the cost. So one thing Jeremy asked me to add to this presentation was case studies. Some of these concepts in concert seem to be pretty unique. So where are these concepts being applied throughout the country, and what are the effectiveness? So I don't need to sell you all on the benefits of roundabouts. We obviously have several roundabouts here in town, several thousand throughout the country, tens of thousands throughout the world. But many roundabouts are a little unique, and really it's just kind of a nuanced roundabout. It just has that traversable center median is the only difference there. But in total, many roundabouts, the national data shows a 78 to 82% reduction in crashes, 3 to 4 times more efficient than an all-way stop control, which is what we're, under the right circumstances, which is kind of what we're seeing on 17th. Effective speed reduction, but the key with the mini roundabout is the low construction costs. So here's an example from Shakopee. It's about $340,000, and a typical roundabout will be between $1 to $2 million. So you can see the kind of the cost benefits of having the smaller cross section here. So before, this is by school. After school, there was 6 minutes of peak hour delay. You can see the top screen. And after, it doesn't even look like the same picture, but only a couple vehicles of delay, a couple minutes after school is out. And so a secondary benefit of that frustration mitigation was there was a lot of complaints about students trying to cross this intersection and vehicles rolling through the stop sign. And they found that once they mitigated some of that frustration, they were really able to improve the safety, improve the visibility. People coming into roundabouts are very alert. They're looking. They're not just waiting their turn. They're looking for gaps. The second example, so not as close to home, but I think this is a good example of speed reduction. This is in Bel Air, Maryland. It also is a very low cost, $100,000. What they found is this was a two-way stop control, and it reduced the corridor speeds from 38 miles per hour to 15 miles per hour. And again, this was just one of the concerns that if we were to improve traffic flow along 17th, are we going to make this a highway where people are flying through the area? And it really shows that there's been case studies to show that it is effective speed reduction, along with the efficiency and 75% reduction in serious crashes at this location. Here's another context. Here's another example. I like this one because it shows the context-sensitive benefits of roundabouts. This is in a downtown in St. James, Minnesota. You can see the example. It's facilitating truck movements and helping with kind of their aesthetics plan with parking and a variety of different other benefits. Protected bike facilities. Transitioning to that, we do have a lot of protected bike facilities throughout the country. The last count that I've seen is 252-way protected bike facilities throughout the country. So kind of some of the studies that have looked at bike lanes that are protected versus just your typical bike lanes, is we find that it's about a 7 times more comfort level. You can see in the bottom of the screen, the comfort level is increased by 7 times according to cyclists if you have a planter buffer versus just a typical bike lane. And at the top of the screen is that study I referenced earlier, that having a protected bike facility can draw people in there. So they're showing, on average, 46 to 68% increase in riders, and that was locations that had bike lanes already. They again, bike lane versus protected. And that's really the nuance here, right? It's not just bike lanes. There's bike lanes throughout the city. It's the protected nature of the two-way facility. Protected shows a 28% less risk of a crash. And then an interesting study at the bottom, which isn't perfectly applicable to this project, is it's the spur economic growth, which is not the goal or intent. We've mostly built out. But there was a lot of concern from the public of, this is going to reduce the value of my property if we reconfigure this in this fashion. And there's been studies to show that it actually provides some benefit in that fashion. So here's a couple actual examples. In terms of close by, there's quite a few in the Minneapolis, St. Paul area and surrounding suburbs. Here's an example from Minneapolis and St. Paul that you can see that are pretty similar. Obviously a very avid bike community, a lot of heavily traveled corridors, but there's also several examples from around the country on corridors that have populations similar to Fargo that are supporting this. So the last three slides is kind of coming to timing of the improvements. So reconstruction, as Jeremy mentioned, is needed from 5th Street to 38th Street. And so at that point, you're gonna have to rebuild all of this road anyways. And so a lot of these improvements can be, really parts of this project without being very expensive improvements that like a retrofit would be if you were to come in and build these on top of a road. And so keeping it within the right-of-way footprint, which the concepts are, allows you to save some costs on when you have to rebuild that road anyways. And so looking at the timing, the city was able to implement the 45th Street improvements and kind of that restriping from 42nd to 45th. And then the short term is really that pavement need. So in the next 5 years, that pavement needs to be reconstructed really from 38th all the way east to 5th Street in different probably phases. And then long term, we're not even positive we need to look at the expansion on the west end, but keeping that in our back pocket if we start to see some congestion build. And then also just based on the nature of this project and a lot of the polarizing nature of the improvements, there are opportunities for test applications. The top left is a rubber mini roundabout that you could utilize, or you could just have something in the middle. Obviously, a truck couldn't go over the top of that, but and then on the right, there are some applications that you can go for tests, and so you could be able to say, all right, here's the speed before, here's the speed after, here's the delay before, here's the delay after, here's the public support before, here's the public support after, to test some of these things if there is still outstanding concern about the support of these concepts. So with that ends kind of the presentation, so I'll open it up for kind of the dialogue.
Thanks, Mike. I think that was great. Well, the mayor made it. Welcome. So we're here to answer any questions that you may have. One thing that he touched on, the maybes on some of the stretches, and he showed the mini roundabouts and the two-way cycle track. But there are some options that we could do if we wanted to change the design a bit, at intersection by intersection. So, based on feedback, if one intersection should remain a four-way stop and the other two should be mini roundabouts, or a full roundabout and a mini roundabout, those options are available. Or if we like the mini roundabouts, but we don't like the cycle track, we probably could look a little bit harder to see if we can get an off-street path in there, so we could have the benefits of the roundabouts, but the bikes, we could try to put them on the boulevard. So anything is really up for discussion. I will add the stuff that says that was completed this summer. We came to you this spring to get pre-authorization, pre-approval to do the restriping and the modifications at 45th Street. So you guys have approved the stuff that we say has been completed. So, Bruce.
Thanks, Jeremy. This kind of factors into CIP planning and the special assessments work that's been going on and stuff. Tony and I were just talking about 17th is an arterial, but it isn't truly an arterial. It's something east of the interstate and something else west of the interstate. Can you just explain that?
Yeah, so under our current funding policy, from 5th Street to the interstate, we assess it like it's an arterial. So there's a band. I-94 will be the southern limit, and going to the north, I think it's 15th Avenue is the northern limit. And then west of the interstate, it's not there isn't a ban for it. We assess it as a collector street. And really, there's still somewhat of a ban, but it's not technically has a ban. One thing I will add on that note about costs is one thing we hear time after time when we have a project is people don't want to pay for bike facilities on the street in front of their house, if it is something as elaborate as this. So if we would move forward with a two-way cycle track, I would probably make a recommendation, work with Tom and Brenda, is that we would want to use city funds to pay for the portion that's the bike infrastructure. I think that makes sense, and I think people could buy that concept.
Along those lines, a couple questions. If I got the one slide, there was 150 bikes per day. Was that an accurate data point, or is it just an example?
I think it says it increases by 151%, but there's no data points on how many bikes are out there today.
Okay, so I misread that. It was percent increase, not.
Yeah.
Okay, that was my question. At what point is a cost benefit on 150 bikes versus the cost of doing it? Sure, you guys would have methodology for that. I'd like a little more detail on the test roundabout. How typical is a period of time you would just take that existing or that infrastructure and plop it in the middle and use the existing street and intersection to test?
Yeah, so we.
Under that same analogy, if there was a mini roundabout, nothing would change as far as curb size, because that was one of the concerns at the April meeting, is some of the residents are really concerned that, that this is going to go closer to their homes, and if that's no longer the case under a mini proposal, that at least alleviates, one consistent concern. But I'd like to know more about this test roundabout.
Sure, so we actually implemented this in Mandan last summer for a similar style concept where there was just paint. It was part of the kind of ND moves that went through. But the one thing they didn't do is a before and after study. I think that's a really important aspect, is to understand the benefits in terms of actual data, is getting that data point before of support, before and after, but also the data point of, it feels like it's so much faster. Well, here's the data points before and after, and so it's just kind of a data assessment. And I think you'd probably look at it at least a 3 to 6 month test period, or whatever the feedback starts out at. I mean, you could start it as a 3 month, but obviously you'd still have to buy those rubber installations and see how they work, but that is an option. That is a good way to test it. In terms of the bike facility, it's a little easier because that's just paint, and those delineators are pretty cheap to install too. So it is a good opportunity to test it out to see if it works.
So one that is interesting to bring that up. So 19 years ago, we did do a test area in Blue Mountain Lakes on 26th Avenue. I don't know if any of you remember, you probably do. There was one of our concrete pipes that we usually use to flow water. We put it on end, put it right in the middle of the intersection. Bruce might remember. And then we had some rubber speed humps that we put on 26th Avenue, and then we put some more curbing at 32nd Street to narrow the street, to get a feeling of narrowing. So we have done a test. We have tested things out over the years here in the city.
Just a couple quick things. So the mini roundabout thing, if we're going to do that, then we should do it on some unbusy street to try it. And especially in the wintertime, I have some concerns about that, because it looks really nice in the summer. In the wintertime, that just looks like another snowdrift and people will fly right over it. The other thing is the bike facility. If you looked at that, combining a roundabout and the bike facility, if you looked at all those roundabouts, there wasn't a bike facility. That's just too much going on. You're going to have issues. And so I will not support that. And I do think the roundabouts near the interstate, that's a great thing, because we all know that's an issue, and I do that. But the other thing is the bike facility, that looks beautiful. Do you know what you don't see in any of them? Ice and snow. And so 6 months out of the year, that thing is going to be either buried in snow or unused. And so that's another reason I won't support that. Thank you.
So the one thing that we could, so what our problem with any reconstruction of existing built streets is, in the built environment, if there's not a path there already, it's really difficult to try to try to make one on the boulevard. Usually there's large trees in the way, or it's tight right away, or there's utility boxes, or there's wooden utility poles. So that's why a lot of these streets are very difficult to try to retrofit with a boulevard path. I will say you probably could go from the interstate to 25th Street or even to South High. You could have some success getting a path there, but from South High going to the river, it's going to be really difficult. So that's why on-street.
So just to repeat, I've made this point many times. You are welcome to use any street in Fargo to ride a bicycle on. It's open 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And the number of people that I see using the bike lanes is a handful. And the other thing I'm looking forward to is our new traffic fines. They're also going to be available for pedestrians, but also for bicycles. So they'll share the responsibility of following the traffic rules, because from what I see, there's not a lot of that going on.
Just one other point too to the snow removal is with the two-way facility is it's wide enough that you can actually remove it, and that is a challenge with the bike lanes as you kind of push the snow right on their bike facilities. But that doesn't speak to the point, well, will there be people on there at that time period?
So I was going to ask that question. What do we do about snow removal in the bike lanes then if there is a separation? I realize you can remove the pots, but there's no bike lane anymore, or it's not doing what you guys are saying it's doing, right? You're basically removing the benefit then. So how do we remove snow without removing the benefit of having a barrier between the bike lanes and the vehicles?
So in the wintertime, we would have to remove anything vertical for our plows. Ben's in the crowd here, but the two-way cycle track on the one side gives the opportunity for it to get plowed in the wintertime and then also to get swept in the summertime. I would like to put on our existing, one-way paths or lanes that we have, like on 10th and University. I'd like to put the flexible delineators up just to give that visual separation, but there's no device that Public Works has to clean the debris, and in the wintertime we'd have to yank them. So that's our dilemma. So the two-way cycle track on one side kind of helps Ben out as far as cleaning and maintenance is concerned.
To your point, though, how do you maintain the benefit is obviously there's that balance. If you're going to pull those out, we still would have at least 3 feet of extra separation of painted delineation, which would help. But if you're going the one direction, you'd have the 3 feet plus that extra opposing direction. So you'd mitigate a little bit. Some of the kind of the westbound traffic would be a little bit less, but the eastbound would still get some of that benefit.
Yeah, so that's kind of one of the reasons why I don't really like it on the 25th to 38th section there with the physical barriers between, because you're paying those dollars and then you're removing the benefit in the winter when it's not going to be used anyway. So then you have confusion then of where the bike lanes are, where they're not in the winter because there's not a barrier there. So I think we could confusing residents then, and you're going to get probably more accidents if people actually use it. I'm sort of in the same camp with Dave too, as regards to the roundabouts with the bike lane going through it. I don't know. That seems like a nasty accident if it does happen. Someone's going to be turning, looking to their left, trying to get into the roundabout while someone on their bike is going to come smash into the side of them, then whose fault is it? You know what I mean? Do you have studies or do you have information that says that doesn't happen?
So if you look at there's a lot of bike facilities on normal roundabouts under this context. And so just the combination of a mini with a two-way bike facility is a little unique, but obviously roundabouts with two-way bike facilities is very different. So that's why if you look at the design on the back of the sheet, you can see that we're actually pulling them off to the side. That's why there's the nice advantage of being kind of on the one side. So we actually treat them and separate them so they wouldn't be going through the roundabout, so you wouldn't have the concern of that safety, that conflict of going through. And then kind of going back to the benefits of the two-way bike facility, if you eliminate it, I mean, you look at one of the concepts which we showed at the beginning of the video, there is the option if you wanted to put a raised median that was there all the time. It wouldn't have that same aesthetic benefit, but it'd still keep them close. You'd have the benefit during all times of the year as well.
Just one more thing to add. So from 5th Street to University Drive for the bike lane, they're going to remove off the parking on the streets. The neighbors will not be happy to hear that. I don't know what the survey numbers are going to show, but that's not going to go over well. And also removing on-street parking from University to Drive to 25th Street. Same thing, that's neighborhoods, and they expect to have on-street parking. And to think that they're going to be happy to remove their parking so you can have bike lanes that are used 6 to 7 months out of the year by a handful of people, they're not going to support that, and neither will I.
So as part of the study, we did collect parking data to understand what the implications would be, or we even proposed solutions. And so we found that of the parking spaces available that we'd be removing, it was like a 1% occupancy. It was basically like one car that we found, other than there was like an estate sale someplace nearby that had a couple at some point. But it was almost zero the entire time throughout the day. We collected 6 times throughout a normal weekday and 4 times throughout a weekend. And so it's because of the way that the lots are set up, that they're mostly facing the local street coming into it, it's not utilized the same way that a lot of times when you have driveways coming into it. So.
Just one more thing, but one of the things we do is we require, for our street department, you have to park on different streets, different times, and so you're required to move off the streets to the other street, otherwise you get a ticket, and so that's one of the concerns.
I'd just like to add that, over the past year, we've been gathering public input for the long-range transportation plan update. And one of the things that we do hear the most consistently from people is that they like the bike facilities that exist. They wish they were more continuous. They wish they were, more, that they had more continuity. So it frustrates them if they have a little piece of bike facility and then it doesn't continue, and they just like to see it more comprehensive. So, I realize that's broad input, doesn't necessarily relate to people's input about what goes on right in front of their property, but I did want to share that with you because we're nearing the end of that plan, that planning process, and that is one of the sort of consistent themes that we've heard when we are at the street fair or at pop-up meetings throughout the metro area. So,
can I add one thing to that? So I think it's great that people would like a lot of things. I think we should ask them, how would you like to pay for them? And actually, the other thing we've asked for a long time is how many people are actually using these things? Because from what I see with my own eye, it's a small amount. And so I would like to have some facts to say, here's how many people are using our bike lanes. Because what we hear a lot is, well, I'd like this, I'd like this. Well, we would all like a lot of things, but we have a budget and we got to pay for them. And so when we ask, what would you like, I would ask you, if you wouldn't mind asking, how would you like to pay for it? Because then that has a tendency to change people's perspective on things. Because I would like a Gulfstream plane, I would like it, but I don't have the financial budget to pay for one. But I would like one, and so the polling data would go very well. But anyway, thank you.
I think the problem you have is some of the trends are being more bikeable. I think we'd have to look like interconnections throughout the city. Actually, 17th Avenue is really good east-west, going to West Acres and going to the parks. So you do have that conflict. You have some data out there now in the metro areas. The more walkable, bikeable you are, you're an appealing city for people to move into. So I think part of you showed retail, if you can increase retail, if you have these types of things. I was down in the cities over the weekend, and I just noticed the roundabouts. Edina had the doubles, where you have 2 cars in the roundabouts, and that was kind of interesting to me. If we do a mini roundabout, the bus still seemed to hit the curb as he went around it twice. I watched him do it twice, so I know he didn't quite. Then finally, he swung out into that second lane, was able to make it. So the only issue that I have with mini roundabouts, I could see it being a little sort of problem, and appreciate Tony's comment, is that neighbors don't really want their curbs moved closer to their homes. But the roundabouts do slow traffic. It does work well to move traffic along. I can see why you guys are looking at that. I agree with Dave in some ways. I think the neighborhood probably doesn't really want the bike lanes. A lot of comments I've gotten have been against that, but the contrast is I think Metro has to look at how big an issue is that, and do we have the connectivity throughout the city that if you chose to do more biking and whatever, I think we do have that conflict of our weather, of, what do we do in the wintertime? And I agree that I don't see a lot of bicycles in the winter. I see real diehard people, but you don't see a lot of other people do that. So I think we're getting to that dilemma in our metro area of how much commitment do we have for bicycles and what we already want to put them. And Jeremy, I remember when we did 10th Avenue, how that was mixed reviews when we did that. So this is a good study. I think it brings up a lot of good points, but I think as commissioners, we have to try to figure out, I think that's part of the cost benefit ratios, and is it really important and impact to that? I was curious about the parking, that not a lot of people park on those streets, and I guess that's my impression too. It seems more of a conduit than people parking in those areas.
Yeah, so really, oh, go ahead.
I'll just chime in. The folks I know in the biking community have identified 17th Avenue as a key need, you know, to get across the town. And that's what I know from them. And I'm not a biker, but that seems pretty consistent from what I'm hearing from them. And, you know, Commissioner Pepper and I can completely agree with appreciate your concerns, but I just can't imagine not building bicycles into our plans for the future. I can't imagine how people would judge us down the road, like, you didn't? Like, why wouldn't you? Of course you should and need to. Now, doing it cost effectively and in fact efficiently is your goal, but of course we have to. And they won't use them until the facilities are there. How do you expect people to bike when the bike paths aren't there? They won't until they are.
So if I could add, the one thing about 17th Avenue is there is a lot of density along it. So from 42nd Street in the West Acres area, there's a lot of housing units, and then near the interstate, south of 13th Avenue there's a lot of people that are living out there that could use these facilities. Will they? I don't know. The question about in the wintertime, you know, we are cold. There's very few that bike in the wintertime. But, you know, some winters, believe it or not, they are fairly short. I remember golfing on St. Patrick's Day, so there are some of them are only 4 or 5 months. So that's our dilemma. But as designers, you know, we're trying to look out for most people, and when we do build roads, they try to last 30, 40 years. So we are looking out generations ahead of us. So we keep talking about bikes quite frequently, you know, from time to time, month to month. And in my mind, we've got a really good system north-south along the river, the paths, and then now we've got 4th Street and 5th Street. And then as you leave town going south, you move over to University. And I've always thought the best way to utilize our system is to get people east and west to that north-south spine. And 40th Avenue is a really good conduit to get you to the river. And really, as you move north, there really aren't too many of them. And 17th Avenue gets to be the next place where you cross the entire city, where you could move people. I may be a wet on that. So so at the same time, COG is doing a bike gap analysis. So we've got 8 gaps that we're looking at. We'll probably have a brown bag on that, I don't know, 6 months from now. But we've identified like 24th, 25th Avenue to get it from basically 25th Street to 5th Street. You know, there's not a bike facility there, but I think one could and probably should go there. We're actually looking at 13th Avenue to get from basically Carl Ben Eielson to the river in that stretch. We're looking north and south by the VA, behind the VA along the river. So the bike discussion really isn't going away unless you adamantly say stop talking about bikes. But they are going to be a talking point, you know, occasionally from quarter to quarter to year to year. So this issue really isn't going away. So that's kind of where we're at with the design of the bike stuff.
Can I ask for a favor? Can we see some numbers as to the number of people riding, the number of people using the lanes? Because I think I've asked for that for a very long time. So, and I think it's ridiculous that we're spending a lot of money on one segment. Bicycles. It's like you can ride a bike on any street in Fargo. And how about motorcycles? Why are bicycles a separate, get their own everything? Why is that?
I could provide some data too. We do bike and pedestrian counts every September, and then we have some automated counters out there too. So yeah, one of the more popular locations where we count bicycles and pedestrians is the Lindenwood Lift Bridge, and so we compare that with the Oak Grove one. It's actually 3 times more at the Lindenwood one. So there's a lot of connectivity going across the river there, and so that's 17th is right there too. So so it's a good connection if people want to continue to go further west or so. But I can provide.
Well, we
data.
hear from Williams that we are the #1 bike share in the nation, David, from the university. Is that still true or not true, that our bike share program is very popular?
Yeah, our bike share program broke the national record for, with B-Cycle, the company, for most rides per bike per day, which was about 7 rides per bike per day on average. And other places were about 3 rides per bike per day. Supposedly, Austin, Texas has adopted our model and might be surpassing us, but I haven't seen the data, but that's what I hear.
But Dave, I hear you. I hear you on the bike counts. We need to figure out a plan as to how to count better. We have pretty sparse locations, I would say 8 or 10 spots, but we do need to do a better job. I'm going to be curious to see how 4th Street's going to look now. I think 4th, it's going to be continuous from the water plant up to basically the hospital and right through Main Avenue. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of ridership there is there.
Yeah, that university, I'd like to see that as well. How much more of the bike lanes, if there were bike paths next to 17th between 25th and 38th, what's the cost difference there than protected bike lanes in the road? Do we have any idea?
So one thing I didn't, hearing everyone talk, I realized I didn't explain very well that we're fitting this all within the existing footprint of the roadway surface. So if you were to, for example, widen to a shared use path, that'd be creating new surface. And so we're able to repurpose that and save money by doing so. So we didn't look at specifically dollars and cents difference, but a lot of the challenges we specifically had from 25th East was all the trees, all the impacts, all the driveways. And so from rideability standpoint and cost and then just beautification impacts, it was kind of a no interest starter at the beginning. From 25th to 38th, we are able to fit that within the right of way. Specifically with the roundabouts, we don't even need left turns anywhere, right? So by doing so, you're actually repurposing pavement that is underutilized today. And so it actually saves some money in terms of not creating a new surface. So I'd say it's probably cheaper than widening out and rebuilding that shared use path.
And then as far as, 5th University, I used to live in that neighborhood. And I know 17th, there are peak times, but by and large, very not heavily trafficked at all. 18th is far more traffic, especially in the winter being a snow emergency route. So, just kind of to Dave's point a little bit, having a dedicated bike lane in that area, I think, just the striping and the maintaining of that would be unnecessary even because I think people feel relatively safe just in that smaller neighborhood already riding in the streets. So I realize that we want to have that, we have a path, take the path, but at the same time, I don't know what it costs to stripe all that stuff and to maintain all that. I don't think it's necessary cost not necessarily in that area. I think people are already doing it.
Yeah, and so that's why you can kind of see the evolution of the path really getting, simpler and simpler. So on that side, it's just pavement, which can get pretty cheap, but certainly it is a maintenance issue for sure.
Let me just add as well, I have the same concerns over biking and the data. If there is data or you're going to collect data, could it be distinguished between recreational riding and work or business? I think in my mind, it's 2 different kind of approaches to that. Particularly as you go west, it's commerce, it's commercial, there's residential out there, I get. But anecdotally, I drive around town work in North Fargo and back and forth downtown. I rarely see a bike on University or 10th Street, and we have the paths. I can't remember the last time I met a bike on the bike path. That's just point. And then if I had to vote today on this project with roundabouts, I wouldn't do it. What I hear the most concern about is the impact to the neighbors and the folks on 17th Avenue. And if you're coming back with a different version of a mini roundabout, then it doesn't consume additional real estate, that if they knew that, they might have a different opinion. And maybe they do, I don't know. But I think we need to do a 4 to 6 month test and not in the winter. And that would, I think, give the opportunity for full vetting of this, whether it's going to work or not.
Can buses and trucks drive over that rubber test roundabout? Is that mountable just like the permanent mini roundabout would be? Or
There's different options on the market, and I haven't specifically used any of the rubber ones, but it is designed, it's fully rubber, so you could be able to design to go over it. Because obviously, even if you're not a truck, you're gonna hit it from time to time. But I think we'd have to do some more looking into exactly what we want to do. Our Mandan test pilot was paint, just paint. So, I mean, it's a lot different. You can kind of go all over. So that has to be in the summer, of course, but.
All right, any other comments? So really, the next path forward here is to, MetroCog would desperately like to close this corridor study. But as that closes, city staff still has to sit down and brainstorm a game plan as to how we move forward. We're in no rush to start tearing up the street, but it is going to be on our work plan in the next 3 to 4 years, starting at 5th Street and working west. It's in pretty rough shape from University to 25th Street. The street department does Band-Aid it from time to time, but I think this has been a good discussion, for sure. I like getting all this information from you guys in a relaxed atmosphere. Anybody else have any comments? So I think maybe we'll bring the corridor study to you guys as part of your city commission meeting. You don't really have to select an alternative. I guess we can brainstorm how we do that, but I think we can close the corridor study and then still have a path forward to how we implement this.
I think you're right. I think that the commission, if you choose to do so, you can accept the study. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're adopting it in terms of, you know, your intent to implement every recommendation that's in it, but you can accept it. And we could bring it, that would allow us to bring it forward to the Transportation Technical Committee and Policy Board. You know, we also have a complete streets policy that this was completed with that in mind, and so it does meet that, it does, you know, fulfill that policy if you choose to implement it, so, or whichever portions you do choose to implement.
Okay. So with that, I guess we're adjourned.